The reason why we all are connected here right now is because of your data package. That's how the streaming works extremely well. That's if you have a good data package. We all know the frustrations when the data package is not working well and the streaming is not well. But we're not only connected here because of a data package. We're also connected here because we are human beings. Even without Zoom, we can just pause for a moment, sense our breath, get a sense of our body, notice our body. It doesn't matter where we sit in the world, irrespective of a data package, we are connected. So I hope you can just maybe scan your eyes, just to get us here. Scan your eyes on the screen. We have about 73 people from Australia to London, to Sweden, Africa, all over the world, from America on this. So you are not sitting on your own. Let just that drop into your sense of being a human being, not just somebody with a data package. And I want to, once you've done that, I want to position today's session and frame it, because we've got such an exciting lineup for today, is that, you know, I can be one of my impatient things in my life is traffic. I just hate traffic. For me, it's the biggest waste of time. And I would be driving can I just sort out traffic? And how traffic is for me in a day often determines how my day is. And not long ago, I was driving in this heavy traffic, and it was bumper to bumper. And the next moment, I saw a big, let me just get that from, I saw a big sign that said that. Casper, you're not stuck in traffic. You are the traffic. And that changed a lot for me, because since that moment I realized, but I can't blame the traffic. I'm part of it. I am traffic. And in the same way, yeah, we are not experiencing an external pandemic or COVID-19. It's not coronavirus from there. We are coronavirus. We are COVID-19. We are participating in it. We're not outside of it. And over the last week, we've picked up from our clients huge increase in frustrations, disorientation, exhaustion, sitting at home, being in lockdown, trying to figure out who am I and what is this internal system, and at the same time, huge fear for the system out there. Now, those of you in Scandinavia or in London or in Australia, we sit within huge added burden in South Africa, and that's that it's quite dramatic, because there might be a lot of people dying just from the economic system collapse. While some of my German clients say to me, wow, this is a very interesting social experiment. For us, there's nothing interesting in it. And we sit at home with all the difficulties of my own system and with huge fear of the external system. And the question we've asked ourselves, Dina, myself, William, Simon, and Sonia, are there two systems? Are we not all just maybe part of one system? So for today, we would like to focus on the me and the I system, what's happening for individuals, and we would like to also get an input from other specialists about the external system. Maybe we're not that separate. And I've picked up the fear and the frustration in myself and in my friends. I mean, I saw one Twitter posting, how to cook a hadida, asking for a friend. Now, for those who are not South Africans, to consider cooking a hadida, it's a bird of an animal in our gardens that eating it does not come up. And in fact, yesterday, I mean, I know we have people from Woolworths on here, but it sounds like we might be the first country, as Ben Trovato would say, where there would be a coup d'etat because of roast chicken. The chikunistas might rule this country, because in South Africa, you cannot sell warm food. And then at the same time, there's a deep exhaustion that clients are facing or feeling. So I'm looking forward to the session, and let's explore that in further detail. So I'm going to zoom out again from let's say the South African perspective, and we have Daniela. Daniela, I hope I know in Brisbane, Australia, it's already gin and tonic time. In South Africa, and I'm sure in England as well, we don't always like the Australians. It's a hate and love relationship, but I must say you are at least one Australian that I like. I've learned so much from you about systems, and Daniela is a physician, and she specializes in psychological medicine and therapy, and she's a master practitioner of a neuropower team. There's somebody that understands the human system. It's Daniela. And Daniela, maybe if you can share with us what's in the mirror, what are Australians seeing about Australia? What are they seeing in the mirror? And some of your clients, you mentioned extrovert, introvertism, but please, could you share with us what's happening on that side of the world, or even though it's gin and tonic time and only coffee time in South Africa? Very, very welcome, and thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you very much. I think I should let everybody know that this is the lovely version of Caspar. So charming, such a gorgeous host. In fact, he's a tyrant. He said, you have 4 minutes and no more. So that's the Australians bowling the ball right back to the South African batsman.
Thank you.
Look, I can't speak for all of Australia, but I can tell you what I see. And what I've seen is that as every parent knows, and as every leader knows, before we move into development, there's a moment of regression. And what everybody is talking about that I listen to, both my patients and also colleagues, leaders, CEOs, they're all talking about how regressed everybody is. How actually we've moved back to earlier modes of functioning, much more concern with self, except that when there's a means of avoidance, we'll go to what's happening elsewhere, but only as it impinges on the self. So that's an interesting point to remember, which people in their reflections and in their anxiety and fear forget to notice that we're moving as a whole, as well as moving independently. The next point that I thought of that became very obvious is that we're having to rework our identity, both as individuals, as families, and as a nation. Because in a period of enforced isolation, our edifice crumbles. In a meeting today, a younger person said to the group that it's as if a lot of the time under stress, we operate from a scaffolding that we build around ourselves. And in a time like this, the scaffolding crumbles away. Then what are we going to do? Are we going to rebuild the scaffolding so that it holds again and keep on trusting that? Are we going to build the scaffolding from within and simply take it inside rather than have it outside for the world to see? Or are we going to build resilience and move paradigms? And in this, we see that actually the same is happening to our tribe. When a tribe's identity is challenged, we've seen ourselves as a very easygoing people in Australia, free and easy, welcoming of everybody, the land of the fair go. But we very early closed our borders. We very early noticed that there was a rise in unpleasantness publicly and sadistically towards people who looked Asian, who might be second or third generation Australians, the old go back to where you came from. And we think of a sociologist who observed that when a community loses its identity, then it's in a very vulnerable position because that identity can be rebuilt for the community by an outside malign influence, the Chicago School, for example, which can then rebuild for its own purposes so that the extremes become more extreme. The middle class disappears or the middle disappears, and so whatever the paradigm, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. So we're seeing that, and so we see that this is a time of paradox. where it's very easy to see the swing from the one to the other. But the difficulty and the challenge is to hold the tension between the two ends, within and without, rich and poor, and to develop the middle within and without in the tribe. The rate of change, so my third point is that the rate of change is very fast. What was true and an obvious observation, so to say, a couple of weeks ago seems to be less true now. The rate of change, I said, but it's actually rates. Different people are moving through grief, for example, at different rates, so that you see anger emerging and it's not clear. Is this a regression to angry denial, or is it a movement into denial, anger, and then move into bargaining and eventually the sadness and acceptance, the grief process, and then move forward into a more integrated form of development? We see that in families, we see that in individuals, in coaching sessions, but we also see it in the newspapers, for example, and in our politicians. My next point would be that there's a spiritual principle, a proposition that we have what we need, which kind of can be translated into things are what they are. What I see is that everything that has already been with us, in us, around us, part of us, working through us, is simply highlighted at this time. And so if we resist the wish that somebody else either take us back to an ideal past or forward into a wished for future, which is not too different from what we're used to, then we can bear what is and use it to confront what there is to confront in ourselves. Well, what's in ourselves is that we're exhausted, and people don't quite understand why. You made this point in your introduction. What I see is that this medium of needing to do the holding work, the coaching work, the leading work, online, one-on-one, is very different from doing it within a held space where the holding is co-created. The onus now is on the leader to hold much more, and therefore to replenish, to refresh, and to release. And it's as if it's harder now to lead, even though we're all grateful for this this new modality that everyone's so quickly becoming aware of.
Daniela, so just to interrupt you, I just want to partly be rude as well from a time perspective, but I just want to get the essence. What you're also saying is we need to focus on replenishing. Leaders need to look, and hopefully this session is also a replenishing session for leaders, but that is crucial at the moment.
So my takeaway would be that unless leaders and coaches and therapists do the work themselves, we cannot stand as an attractor field that will bring up and replenish and reward and reinforce those whom we lead or whom we aspire to serve.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much and I hope you can stand on the line, and you're welcome to have a gin and tonic, seeing that you're Australian and seeing that you're from Brisbane. Thank you so much for your contribution. And I want to zoom out from Australia and come to Africa. I know in America they sometimes say Africa is a country, but we've got Joe Eshin. Joe is one of my favorite clients in a way, and just his way of thinking and his being, and he's the CEO for Deloitte in East Africa. Joe, what is in the mirror? What are you picking up from maybe a Kenyan, Uganda, Tanzanian perspective? If you can just unmute yourself, Joe, let me unmute you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, so thanks, Caspar. So first of all, thanks again for this opportunity to engage with multiple people from across the world. And Daniela, my daughter, is in Melbourne, and we have a full house except her, so I'm really missing her a lot. I am very well. If I compare myself 3 weeks ago and now, I'm happier because I've not traveled for 6 weeks. I've used less than a quarter of my petrol, and I feel like I'm actually fitter than I've been in a long time. I've been able to do about 150 kilometers for the first time in 1 month of walking, running. So I am in almost like a better place. But at the same time, I am very sad that, you know, we've lost about 14 people in Kenya, and hundreds of thousands of people are dying around the world. So it is, you know, it's two worlds for me, being happy with where I am, and at the same time super sad with where the world is. But what's happening around me, from being in a much better place, I think I'm probably observing things in a different way. And I've been having a lot of webinars with my clients as well. And so what I can do is I can share some of the things that I've observed through some of the calls we've been having in the last few weeks. And one thing that stood out is that the state of mind and where we are right now, working from home, we as leaders seem to be struggling much more than our teams. And I don't know whether you're experiencing the same thing. And I think in a recent call I had with a banking client, the reason is that we are probably too much of control freaks sometimes, that we feel like we are completely out of control currently. And so that's one thing that I'm observing. And the feeling of wanting to be in control will always lead to our calendars being full with a lot of too many calls. And so one thing I've learned the last few weeks is to let go a little bit. And then we're having the same discussion with some of my colleagues, CEOs, is to allow the system to operate on its own and let our teams feel super empowered to get things going. And that's been something interesting for me in the last few weeks. The second point that I've observed is that we made, and I did make the same assumption, we made quite a bit of assumptions when we started working from home. You know, you can assume that all your team members have the right chairs to work from, that they have, you know, Gaspar, you started off that we all have good data. We can make those assumptions. And I'm bringing this up because in Kenya, it's not a total lockdown like in South Africa or some parts of the world. So we are still working, we are still serving clients. It's only about 10 days ago that a colleague of mine called me and said, Joe, my back is killing me. I don't have the right chair to be using to work from home. And so it changed my mindset that we cannot, as leaders, sometimes make certain assumptions. And this is an opportunity, as we pause, it means that we start thinking about our colleagues, our team members, that when they take work home, they probably don't have the right environment to be able to deliver. So that's also quite something interesting for me to reflect on. And the third point, what I'm observing is that we've all gone through a cycle of stress, acceptance, and realizing that our world is going to change. So a lot of the leaders are now having conversations around what we do when our offices are opened, because when your office opens, it's going to be totally different. But most importantly, what mindset do we have as leaders to go into a recovery phase? That the new world will be different, but are we the right leaders to take the new world or our organizations into the new world? And these are new thinking for us. And so let me stop here. And these are what I've been having a lot of discussion around that.
Thank you, Joe. You raise an important point. We're going to go back into a different world. And I know Corné Krieger is on this call, but Corné, I haven't asked you to speak maybe for next time. But I mean, one of the things, Corné was one of the winners of Survivor. And it's one thing to be part of Survivor, but to go back into the world, well, that's a different stressor. And we might have to explore that. So thank you for that, Joe. And if I go from the Middle Africa to South Africa, and I've asked David Tor. David, I know you're on the line here, and David is a founder of a company called You Cook, But I think David is much more than a company called You Cook. And David, one of the reasons why I would have loved you on this call is the food service at the moment in our country, it's almost like a vein of life. And I know You Cook is through the privilege. I mean, we have You Cook because we can afford it. It's not that expensive. By the way, this is not a You Cook advertisement at all. But I get the sense, if I read your emails, that you are somehow connected with what's happening with this vein of food distribution in our country. And what are you seeing? If you can share with us from your perspective. I'm so glad to have you. And thank you for making time available. I know how busy you
are. Cool. Thanks, guys. Yeah, I mean, I guess You Cook, it's been a very polarizing kind of juxtaposed reality, really. We are a service that serves kind of LSM 10, very, luxe product, and that's largely, I suppose, leveraged brand equity and developed its business on the back of the food service industry. We, unlike the rest of the kind of hospitality and food service world, You Cook has been, we were 3 times business plan in April, delivering around 250,000 meals over that month, which is normally a down period for us. We're a cyclical business, and there's kind of like downward trends as we move into holiday periods. And I guess what was which was kind of starkly interesting for me was the state of the business, based on the fact that we were doing exceptionally well, that we were overachieving target, that we were really, really performing at levels that were never expected of us, just based on the context. And everyone was still really miserable, which is really interesting. There was a general feeling of kind of uneasiness and unhappiness within the management team. And we're quite a young group of people. I mean, the average age in the business is probably around 24. Quite a, I suppose there's a real feeling of kind of empathy, and that led us to kind of really deliberate what was kind of going on outside of the kind of confines of our own seemingly quite idealistic existence, and just realizing the extreme state of volatility that large populations of people are going to be in over this period. South Africa is affected by this in ways that the first world, I don't think, really has any comprehension of. I mean, basic kind of needs, Maslow's basic set of physiological needs are seriously under siege. And I mean, I almost felt guilty trading. I felt it was really hard for us to be putting out promotional material. It was really hard for us to be attempting to kind of sell what was essentially inessential food. And we've now, since, we've launched a food fund, we're launching a specific box that's geared at the artisanal and food service community, which is pretty much at neutral profit. We're launching a Save Your Local site with a few different providers in an attempt to create voucher systems for restaurants. And really just coming to realize that people and community and a collective kind of, the collective consciousness is so incredibly important, and it has such an adverse effect on you as an individual, even if you're doing well, and I guess for me, the food system, I don't think is going to be under pressure like in, Western spheres, because with extreme stimulus and people staying home, indulging excessively in food can become an outlet for some people. In South Africa, people just won't have enough money to be purchasing even the basic requirements. So I don't think our system in itself will capitulate. I also think a lot of people in that space, the production environments and the agricultural environments, they'll kind of continue to tick on, because closing doors, even semi-permanently, probably means permanently.
David, if I can just quickly just get a sense from you. So are you saying also that we have a distribution system or a supply chain in South Africa that is working? It might not be enough food, but there is at least something working at the moment.
Yeah, I think in the informal spaces, the problem is probably not, distribution is something that I think, I wouldn't say it's incredibly effective, but there are a lot of efforts that have been geared around, I suppose, kind of getting food to the marginalized. I mean, there's most certainly not enough resource and support in that space to actually feasibly support that kind of vast population of people that are now going to be jobless over this period. So I think it's going to largely be.
So David, so thank you for those perspectives. And I know you're part of the Food Bank or Food Forward. Is Food Forward part of the initiative?
Yeah, that's right.
I have it as Food Forward, yeah, and
we'll post that on our email. It's a fantastic project at the moment. Again, it's not selling Food Forward or You Cook, but thank you for your time, David. And
cool.
You know, as these sessions are, we are in the unknown and uncertainties, and I've got to kind of adapt here. And I've just decided, but we cannot. There's another voice where I haven't prepped Carl Frederick Sammerly for this. Carl, I'm apologies for not prepping you, but I see you're on this place, and I'm just going to use the example. So Carl kind of is locked down in Cape Town and locked down in Stockholm, and Carl is part of a company, Bitprop, who does build properties in townships. Carl, we don't have a lot of time, so I just want to ask you one question. What do you think is different being in lockdown Cape Town, lockdown Stockholm, and maybe lockdown in the township?
No, township, I'm probably not the right person to answer them, but compared, like, as you might have heard, Sweden has chosen a much more liberal way of dealing with the lockdown. They have tried to trust people's behavior and see that people behave responsible, and can we create like a softer lockdown that makes it easier to restart the economy and so on. And it's of course a extreme experiment, but so far it seems that people take quite a lot of responsibility without so much force. And of course there are cultural differences, and also like there are not so much people there, so it's easier to keep distance naturally.
So Carl, are you happy you sit in Cape Town, or did you want to sit in Stockholm? Just give us.
I'm always happy to be in Cape Town. I wouldn't move here, but of course when you see your friends continuing living quite normal lives, and you also see the side effects of a hard lockdown. And now, as we all know, most countries realize you can't have a hard lockdown too long because the financial effects will be too severe. And then of course it's very sad to see that the hard lockdown, the police brutality and so on, it's also side effects that we have to count on, especially in certain countries like South Africa, that it's not that easy to enforce. So, but culturally, it's very strange and interesting at the same time. But and also a short thing about Bitprop, we also see that, of course, all the needs of better housing and better infrastructure in the poor communities are so much more, even more relevant. Like, we can't wait for creating better circumstances and possibility to at least have better water, better circumstances for the people that are the poorest. So I genuinely hope that.
Carl, thank you for that. And I on that topic, I've also learned in the last week that a virtual session like this, it's not that everybody is connected. It took me a few hours, and I wasn't successful to get somebody from a township to join us and tell us what's it like in Alexandria or what's it like in Khayelitsha, and I couldn't. I hope to do that in the next sessions after lockdown, but this is not the full picture that you're seeing at the moment. It's virtual, but it's not the whole truth. And to maybe just to take this before we go into systems, the broader system, this is more about the I, and we're going to move it to the we and the system. Gary Viljoen, I've spoken to you, and Gary's a psychologist in Cape Town, and ask you if you could just maybe expand, if you could maybe wrap this up for us from an individual perspective. Why am I so tired?
Casper, thanks for that. I realize that my work is with individuals mostly, but obviously I'm also very interested in the collective response. And so 2 weeks ago, I reflected on this pandemic as being a slow motion car crash, that we are in a process of being traumatized. It's not a trauma that's happened that we're responding to, it's one that's unfolding in real time. And that makes it very difficult to digest. So a car crash or an earthquake that has happened is difficult enough for the human psyche to digest and can take months or years to make sense of. But a car crash or an earthquake that doesn't stop is a very different animal. And I think that this is what we are experiencing. So I'm interested in our collective responses to the trauma, but also obviously the individual response. I found this very useful. Jeffrey Taxman, a psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, developed a model that he calls the community response to disaster. And in it, he notes that there's an initial phase that he calls the honeymoon phase, in which the community pulls together quite heroically. For example, huge efforts that go into finding and saving the lives of those trapped under buildings in an earthquake, providing medical care, shelter, food, etc. And I think we can see the same sort of response globally to the coronavirus pandemic. And locally. I mean, there are really heroic efforts that are going into this. But the next phase that he speaks about is, after the heroic or honeymoon period, is a phase of disillusionment, when reality begins to set in and we have to come to terms with what is left and what really is. So I see this from an individual point of view and an individual level, that I understand the heroic phase to be that we are responding with what we call manic defenses, for the most part, high energy, high adrenaline, being very proactive, being very constructive, and that these are very useful for the most part. I mean, obviously some of these defensive responses are destructive or pathological. But for the most part, as a community, we respond like that, and individually too. And you'll see that in the ways where people have become involved in feeding schemes, and people are transporting, sanitizing tanks, and people are doing yoga, and people are learning to bake bread, and people are structuring things. But the problem is that it's not sustainable over a long period of time. On that individual level, I think the fatigue that you're talking about is what we are beginning to see. The disillusionment phase begins to kick in. And Casper, I think you're talking about colleagues and friends, seeing that people are communicating less, people are involved less. And certainly that's what I'm seeing on an individual basis. I'm seeing that in my practice. I think that we are beginning to see symptoms of anxiety and depression coming out and emerging more and more. Once we realize that these manic defenses aren't sufficient to sort out this problem, we're kind of left with the reality that we've got to face. And that brings about a lot of anxiety and depression, which is a normal part of a response to this. But I think if we don't acknowledge that, what often emerges for us as human beings is an irritation, a frustration, and a fear to those deeper feelings. So anger, for example, and I am seeing more of that around. So in short, without going into too much detail about that, I wonder what do we do? What do we do about this? And I think I'll go back to some of my recommendations from 2 or 3 weeks ago. And that is really, it's absolutely crucial for us to acknowledge these responses as normal. So can we fight the virus and not the feelings? And I know that's easier said than done, but I really believe that it is crucial. Can we remember the importance of compassion for self and for others? I think we're going to start seeing responses and reactions in the world that are not that comfortable. It's not that heroic. It's not that much of a team effort. It's going to be far more individualistic and fragmented. And to remember that that is also normal. And especially as leaders, I think you're going to have that coming at you from the people around you, the people that you're working with. And then to link in with what Daniela said is, if you are going to be leading or in a position of helping, coaching other people, it's going to be critical for us to do our own work, because these same emotions and feelings and responses are going to be emerging for us. So what do you do to look after yourself? What do you do to acknowledge these normal feelings in yourself and contain yourself and soothe yourself so that you can offer some stability to those around you?
Thank you, Gary. And one of my teachers, John Kabat-Zinn, said mindfulness is to know what's happening while it's happening. So maybe this is just a momentary an opportunity for us. I've heard so many things, and my anxiety is up, and then it's down, and it's up, because it's a lot of talk and it's a lot of fascinating reflections. And maybe just to get ourselves present before we shift from I, me, to the system is maybe just a very, very basic practice. Wherever you sit, if you can just for a moment, you can put your eyes on screensaver. Don't have to look at somebody on the screen, and maybe just look next to your screen. And, you know, as the data package here is our connectivity, we know it's important to have a good data package. We also have a body package, which is the breath. We have a package in our own system that connects us with our body, that connects us with presence. So if you would like to get your nervous system just a little bit less nervous, just for a moment, if you put your eyes on screensaver and just drop your shoulders and just allow your body for 1 or 2 breaths just to breathe itself. How is my breathing in this moment without any need to change it? That's a very valuable data package built into our system, streaming from mind or from head to body. Maybe just follow 1 more breath or 2 more breaths out and in. And just notice, this is where I'm sitting, 12:37 on a Thursday, COVID-19. You could even switch off your screensaver and come back here, if you were away at all. So I'm interested from the I and the we. We've got, and Nora, I'm gonna have to read exactly who you are, because Nora Bateson is just one of my favorite. I would call you a teacher. You might not even know that. It's just because I follow you wherever I can. And your language about warm data, your language about the soil, all the stuff that you talk about. I love the way that you teach and that you share systems thinking. Now, I'm going to read this because it's quite impressive. Nora Bateson is an award-winning filmmaker, writer, and educator, as well as the president of the International Bateson Institute. I hope I say it right, Bateson or Bateson Institute in Sweden. Her work asks the question, how appropriate is this question? It is how we can improve our perception of the complexity we live within, so we may also improve our interaction with the world. Nora, thank you so much. Thank you, Sonia, for arranging this all the way from Stockholm. As you say, none of us are in a country, all of us are in a home. Anything you would like to share with us about systems?
It's really nice to be here and to hear these inputs that have come in so far. Thank you very much. I think it's all very insightful and outsightful, insightful and outsightful. I guess the place that I would start is just by saying that there are these undercurrents of systemic double binds that have been in play for a long time, that are really pushing now into our everyday decisions and lives and interactions, into how you feel about what it is to even be alive in your family, in your home, with your employment, whatever it is. So those double binds don't make it easy to chart a course out of this, because it wasn't a course into this that was any sort of singular cause, right? As you said, when you opened, the virus highlighted those things which were already in motion. A double bind is what happens when you get caught between two things. So the double bind that I'm referring to right now is the double bind of, I need these systems to survive, that include our economic system, education system, political system, technological systems, all of these things, including the formation of my own identity, as Daniela brought in. But at the same time, those systems are also destructive of all those possibilities of survival. That was true before this came. So now in this moment of how are we going to reboot the economy because people are going to starve to death, there's this also a looming question of that normal's how we got here. So not only do we need to figure out a way to be sure that there is food, but also to figure out how to get and create that food without creating the levels of exploitation and destruction that were there 6 weeks ago. Is it too fast? Is it a crash into a new system? Is it time to think about building bridges, or is this just how systems change? Maybe this is just how it happens, and they are just brutal and fast, and that the need to respond to this complexity is going to actually pull us into another set of possibilities. And that's what I'm interested in. I'm quite sure that that's not a binary, that we're going to need a little of both. But my sense is that, it's funny, I started using this phrase maybe that was last week, in the blur of time. Was it yesterday? Was it 4 days ago? Was that 2 weeks ago? When was that? But I started to notice that I was referring to things as, last system. That's last system. That one of the shifts that has taken place, besides having time to be home and maybe my nervous system slowing down some, which, as you say, is not really a sustainable set of activities. But one of the changes has been a way of perceiving those things that made sense 6 weeks ago, that they just don't make sense in the same way. And that's interesting. What is my feeling right now around luxury goods? Do we really need that stuff? There's another whole systemic approach to the question of what is essential. There are deeper systemic interior and exterior questions around what's being revealed. What information is what? Where are the schisms in our societies? The polarizations, the ways in which our forms of information have been contaminated, have been tampered with, have been turned into a framing war. So I guess what I'm seeing is that there is a habituated set of almost invisible momentums, and that those momentums have not been, they've been clear varnish on glass. They were difficult to see, and suddenly you can see them, or some people are seeing them. When this all started and everyone started buying toilet paper in the United States, and then that strange obsession started to imprint all over the world, I'd like to go back to that for a second, because something as ridiculous as that there's also something there, which is that in that moment there was an attention to detail. There was an attention to the detail of toilet paper that said, my life in the minutia is going to change right now. But it also spoke to a sudden recognition of industrial supply chains. And it also spoke to this need to, I need to take care of me. As time goes on, what has become clear about this virus, whether there's a lockdown or no lockdown, is that your health is not your own health. Your taking care of yourself is as much of taking care of other people as you can do, to not be a vector. So where does that leave us? Where are we in this? And I guess what I'm seeing right now is that across so many of the systems that we live within, there is a need for deep restructuring, and that it's a time to do some of that. I mean, you know, you were talking about the food industry, and the food industry is a really good example, because those processes that produce the food, you know, big food, are also prohibiting the hyper-local possibility of the redundancy that any complex system requires to actually survive. So there it is. If food is endangered, then these patterns, how do these patterns begin to shift? For me, this is about actually attending the relationships, and not just mapping strategies with linear causations, but recognizing that these processes are not just happen chance. They are the consequence of several contexts of relationships coming together, right? So if you look at the food industry as an example, that's a political set of consequences. It's an economic set of consequences. It's it's technological, it's cultural, it's filled with all these different relational processes, to the point where, living in Stockholm in December, I have habituated going down to the grocery store to buy a pineapple. It's habituated. It's already there. What do you mean I can't buy a pineapple? So some things have come into our lives that don't make any sense, and never did make any sense, but they happened. And how are those being revealed? What is essential? What is it possible to continue now that could be a continuance of something? Someone spoke earlier about a deeper time, another way that people lived together that they're having to think about now. People are putting in gardens. People are thinking about how to make that food last.
Nora, so if I can come in with a moment question there, I love the way the calm way also that you explain systems. And are you saying, because many people are saying, Caspar, we need to strategize, we need to do scenario planning, it's future thinking, but it's also the relations you're talking about. Is what is the soil? What do we need to prepare now so that we can be ready for the future, instead of just thinking about what the future should be? Anything you can say about that?
I think that if you think about the way the soil does the soil's magic, the soil is not strategizing for the forest. And it certainly isn't strategizing for the idea that you and a friend might have walking through that forest. So what I'm interested in here, and that might be something to bring in, is looking at how do we provide the possibility for relationships that build relationships that build relationships, because that's what the soil does. That's how you generate vitality. And for me, if there's one question right now about what the future is, it's about vitality, about life. So how do we begin to nurture those relationships that do not deliver a measurable outcome at the first order, but generate second and third and fourth order relational processes, right? So the reason that I'm buying a pineapple at ICA is not a first order issue. It's several orders down. How did that come to be? And that's the sort of thing that I think this time is about. It's about recognizing that it may be that so much of our organizational process is actually too flat to hold the deeper warm data and the deeper relational process change that we really need. That's a hard question.
No, thanks for a lovely answer. I was just thinking, Sonia, is there anything?
Casper, sorry, Casper, just before you go to Sonia, I just want to make a link between what David Thor shared about his management team and what I'm hearing you saying, Nora, is it's a team who all of a sudden had bigger success because of the circumstances, and yet their emotional well-being and psychological well-being just took a dip. And it's as if their own sense of consciousness kicked in and said, but there's something wrong about this if we look at what's happening in our environment, and we are in the food industry. So what I think where they are great role models for us, and everything that you also spoke about, Daniela, about asking questions about our identity, using the discomfort on the inside for positive change and saying, so in our industry, what can we do to build different relationships in ways that have more knock-on effects, not just our own customer, but second order, third order. And Casper, sorry, I interrupted you. You wanted to ask Sonia a question.
No, I just wanted to ask Sonia's got anything to add, because I know Sonia knows Nora very well. And so, anything you would like to add there? You know the audience also very well. So if you'd like to add maybe 1 minute before we go to Simon.
Nora spoke about these double binds, and somebody else spoke about, being in paradox. And I think what we've kind of been dumped into, or what we're being forced to do, is to start thinking, we're very used to thinking in terms of hierarchy and in terms of categories, and even in binaries, something is either good or it's bad, or it's, we're used to thinking like that. And we've started thinking in terms of networks. I think what's happening now is we're being forced to think about entanglements. It's going back to the idea of the messiness that we spoke about last week. It's how things are connected in ways we don't understand. We need to think across the various levels in systems. We need to think about the local as well as the system, and we can't afford to make these dichotomies between individuals and the systems. It's going back to you, I am the traffic. So I think we're being called to just think in very different ways in terms of entanglements and flows and relationships, and we're not really used to that. I'm just struck by that.
Thank you. The reflection is important, understanding, and Simon, Dr. Weitzman, who's some of you know him. He's heads up in MISA, South Africa, the Institute of Mindfulness, and much more than that. Simon, how would you summarize, and how could you help us end the session in a good way? Over to you, Doctor.
Yeah, I'd like to maybe just use as the template, Nora, your insight and how you're placing a central, paying attention to relationships. And maybe using the phrase being in relationship. By paying attention to relationship, we are being in relationship to ourselves to start, and then from that foundation to each other, and then to second, third, and fourth order relating. Gary posed the question, what do we do in response to traumatization and not fighting the feelings? How do we, so it's not only being in relation to human beings, but being in wise and compassionate relationship to all things that are arising inside us and around us. Being in wise relationship. So the relationships are both the interactions with, but also a quality of being with. Being with ourselves as we are, as things emerge, and in fact allowing the second, third, and fourth order relating to emerge by not reacting immediately out of impulse and fear. So just in the last moments that we have for today is maybe just to is to bring this quality of being in relationship with, starting with the ground beneath our own feet, So either, is Casper's wonderful phrase of using a screensaver, either to just deflect your attention away from the screen and let your gaze fall softly onto the ground, or if you'd like, onto something outside the window, if you have a window, something natural, or if you're comfortable, to let your gaze fall softly internally. And just the subtle shift of inflection, and most importantly of intention, to come off automatic. We immediately drop into being in relation to ourselves in an embodied way. And the mind might be spinning around, go, yes, but what must I do? What must I do? What must I do? And so just give your mind this instruction. If it wants to know what to do, simply allow everything to be as it is, just for now, rather than fighting, being with, shifting the mode of the brain from doing and drivenness into being just where we are, just as we are. Maybe that means feeling your feet on the floor, being with your feet on the floor, or your bum on the chair, or the infusion of visual impressions falling into your visual awareness, the movement of trees and plants and clouds and the texture or the colors, or simply being with the breath coming and going. Not having to do anything for now, just for this present, here and now moment, but allowing and inviting this way of being in relation to this present moment. And just from this foundation, from the sense of I'm here now, I'm sitting and I'm breathing, and there's this world around me and my mind is moving and I'm feeling this or that. Just opening to the possibility, maybe the direct sense of sitting in this Zoom room, that whether you are aware of it explicitly or implicitly, we are being in relation to each other simply by the shared intention of showing up and listening deeply. Bringing into awareness the people in your homes, if you're not living alone, and the people in your neighborhood and your communities. And perhaps take a moment to the invisible ones who scurry around, who work relentlessly to ensure that we have a pineapple on our plates, or something equivalent. Each and every one of us embedded in relationship, just acknowledging in some form. And then if you would like to take just a deep collective in-breath, expanding the lungs and the chest, and holding the moment, the breath at its apex, and slowly breathing out together, softly extending a long out breath. And just noticing that where you land up is where you already are.